your own background, your professional career, and how you have ended up as CEO of QantasLink.
Sure, thank you, Kathleen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be here with you. Look forward to having a really good chat this afternoon. In terms of how I got here, so look, some days I ask myself the same question. I started my career as going into chartered accounting, worked at Ernst & Young, and I never had a passion to be an aviation professional. Usually aviation professionals, you'll hear these wonderful stories about how they always looked up in the sky and were fascinated by aircraft and flying, and that's why they're there. That's not my story. I came to Qantas because it was just a great place to go after doing my CA, and I thought I'd be there for about 3 years. And 22 years later, I'm still here. And I think that's for a few key reasons. The aviation industry itself is... it's a fascinating industry. It is very dynamic. There is always external geopolitical or macroeconomic factors that are changing the game on you. But then equally, internally at Qantas, it is the national carrier, and it is a brand that all Australians will have an opinion on. All Australians will feel connected to in some way. Many times that's positive, but also many times that's negative. And what that means is that you're constantly trying to work through those factors. And you know, it's a brand that's 105 years old. It was founded in regional Australia, and you know, many of us who work there feel very passionate about the role that we play in the legacy in keeping that brand strong and serving for Australians into the future.
You mentioned regional Australia there. You don't have a regional background, but one thing we have in common is we're both city girls working for regionally focused organisations. What have you learnt about regional issues? What have you learned about country customers in your time at QantasLink?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Kathleen. Sometimes I feel like a bit of a foe when I'm in regional Australia, but it's been really humbling to take on this role and spend a lot more time getting to understand the importance of regional Australia, the role that it plays economically and socially, but also just the phenomenal amount of capability and experience that exists in so many people that are doing wonderful things. But also really acknowledging the real challenges that do exist and making sure that they get a voice and get heard, particularly, you know, at the board tables in Australia, because there are challenges. I'm sure we'll talk to some of them today. But I think those are things that just don't get talked about too much. I do think some of the best people that I've met are in regional Australia, and I always, every town I've gone to, there is always something that is flagship or unique, and I always enjoy getting to learn and understand a little bit more about that.
Can you tell us a bit about the people that are using your services, the customers? What are they mainly using it for? I know that it's an essential service to access quality healthcare, education, for people to be able to travel for work. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, you know, in terms of customer segments, we've a lot of corporates, a lot of small, medium enterprise businesses, and then what we call leisure customers, but as you say, they kind of work across many sectors. Many times that is supporting, you know, health and services, you know, agriculture, mining and resources, and of course tourism and people just connecting back with family and friends. And every community almost has a different mix or makeup. So we serve, you know, we do have more than about 90 odd routes across Australia and serving about 60 ports or destinations across Australia. WA looks very different, obviously, to what New South Wales will look like. And we're really cognizant of, making sure that, we understand those respective customers and what their needs are differently. And that will drive things like, schedule and frequency for how we build our network up.
So how much does that play on your mind as the CEO, that there are people travelling, it's essential travel? My understanding is my obstetrician last year was saying that Broken Hill, for example, has a fly-in, fly-out service with their obstetrics. So, there are people that are travelling and they're doing so to save lives, they're doing so because they're accessing essential health services, etc. How does that, as the CEO, how does that play on your mind?
Yeah, it's a really important part of, the purpose of why, myself and my teams come to work every day and do what we do. We do spend a lot of time, thinking and remembering what our founders did back in 1920, which was a very similar thing. They started Qantas to effectively connect regional remote communities in Queensland to deliver mail and health services. And, they had a passion, and it was incredibly innovative at the time to do what they did, and they took many risks to get there. But, it's no different today. And we do spend a lot of time, listening to the feedback of our customers and our communities. One of my colleagues, Adam, here today, who is one of our regional managers across New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, Tasmania, we'll spend time, in our communities really listening and understanding the feedback. We know that things like the first services in and out of a day are often very important for doctors, medical professionals and others who are trying to connect into communities to provide services. And so we work really hard on how we can make sure that we can meet those requirements.
I'd love to ask you about being a woman in aviation. I guess historically, I think people would consider the aviation industry as being quite male-dominated. You've been with Qantas for such a long time. Can you tell us about your own experience there?
Yeah, I'm really, really fortunate because many great women and men who, came before me spent a lot of time working on how do we get diversity across the Qantas Group. And we think about diversity broadly, not just gender, but diversity across all different groups. And for Qantas, that comes from a sense of we've always wanted to ensure that there is inclusion across the board, be it in our workplaces, for our customers, for our stakeholders. So as an organisation, we've worked really hard on that. And, pleasingly, in corporate roles, we've got a really great representation of gender. And so I have been fortunate that being a woman doesn't really make a difference. I work with great colleagues and, there's no difference in the way that we're treated or paid or anything like that. Where the challenges for the Qantas Group lie actually are more within our technical operational roles like pilots and engineers. And we have a lot of work to do there because that is where we do not have representation. So across our pilot group, and that's across all of our respective AOCs or brands in the Qantas Group, it's about 7%. And for engineers, it's less, at about 4%. And that's because we're just not attracting, females, young girls, into STEM-based roles and courses to then be attracted into the industry. But at QantasLink, we're really passionate because actually we have a disproportionate number of female pilots. So in QantasLink, we have about 20% of our pilot group there are females, and many of them are from regional Australia, regional New South Wales. And I think that connects back to how they see the importance of connectivity and services. So that's a space that we are really focused on, and I would say to any of you who have aspiring, girls or women who want to be a pilot or engineer, send them my way. We're very interested to have them get passionate and excited about the industry. We have a pilot academy in Toowoomba to help support, ensuring that we're investing into the skills, and we haven't got a number of scholarships that are available for females to join that program as well.
Okay. Looks like it's got a bright future ahead for women in Qantas, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk competition now. New South Wales Farmers Association this week passed a motion that we're to advocate to the federal government to actively explore the feasibility of a public ownership model for a regional air service. Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I think, so the first thing I'd say is competition is really important in any industry, and, QantasLink absolutely supports competition in the industry. I think for regional aviation, though, what we do need to ensure is that we've got, viability of services as, the number one priority, that we can ensure that services are going to continue into regional communities on a sustainable basis. And we do think, we very much, support Rex. They've been, a great airline and continue to be, and we do, support the government in the work that they're doing to ensure that services are maintained. But there does probably need to be a broader conversation about some of the structural challenges for regional aviation that Rex and other smaller general aviation operators are facing. Some of those QantasLink have faced as well. And I might talk to that a little bit because, I often get asked the question, why are fares so high? Why is it so much more expensive to fly into regional ports than it is, in Melbourne, Sydney? And the answer to that is that a lot of the costs that operating regionally that are faced are increasing exponentially beyond CPI, and some of that comes down to aircraft itself, and I'll start on that. A lot of the turboprop aircraft that are serving regional Australia are older, and there is not new technology that has yet come into the market to serve these smaller routes. So if you look at Rex, it has a fleet of Saab aircraft, had about 56 odd, and it's probably got half of those that are operating. And post-COVID, the supply chains for aircraft manufacturers, parts manufacturers, were very heavily impacted, and so it became very costly and expensive to ensure that aircraft are continued. Obviously will be always kept to the same safety standard, but to do that is expensive. So that is something that they have faced. It's something that other smaller operators face. And at QantasLink, we've had that challenge too. And last year, about this time, we announced that we were retiring our 36-seat and 50-seat aircraft and investing into our 74-seat Q400. And we're doing that to get ahead of these challenges. But they are aircraft that are midlife because there is no new aircraft that are being manufactured by Bombardier who operate that fleet. And really, I think the industry is probably waiting for new technology, be that hydrogen, electrical, etc. But the reality is it's got a number of years to run, and it may not yet be able to reach 50-seat aircraft. It will get there, but it's going to take time. So in the interim, making sure that airlines can cover those costs and ensure that their fleets are maintained is a challenge. The other big challenge is airport charges. Airport charges are something that consistently we see are increasing. Airports in regional Australia have different ownership models. And sometimes that causes challenges because those charges ultimately, whilst they're passed on, the airlines pay them, they ultimately get passed on to consumers. So that is a challenge. And then there's the ongoing challenges of fuel and things like that'll always be moving around with broader macro or geopolitical factors. So put all of those costs together, and ultimately regional towns have smaller populations, and so you do not have the scale of what the major capital cities do. And so it becomes, on a per passenger basis, a lot more expensive to operate those services than what it would for your major trunk routes.
So what do you think is the future of regional aviation then?
I think that there will be can be a strong future. What it's going to take is probably a good look at each state. Nationally, how do we solve for this? I think federal and state governments working together on some of the policy that may be required. I think that's something that probably needs industry consultation and views on, because there are some great smaller operators, regional operators out there who are doing some wonderful things, and I think they've got some real opportunity to have some conversations about how they could play a role. But yeah, I think it needs a broader conversation.
Okay. There's a little bit of a dichotomy with Qantas, isn't there? On the one hand, as you touched on, it's a brand that Australians feel really connected to, and it's traditionally been one of our strongest brands. At the same time, the media is very happy to kind of go after Qantas in many respects when there's questions around customers, etc., and their experience. How does Qantas deal with that?
Look, we accept all the feedback that our customers give to us, and it's something that we have to keep doing a better job of. And we're really focused as a brand to continue to serve our customers better. We're continuing to try to get that right. There will be times when there is things that is beyond the control of the airlines, be that weather and other challenges, but we're continuing to work really hard on it and listening to our customers, and we do that through a number of ways. But we take, we are custodians of this brand, and that is our job to continually do better, and we're very focused on how we can continue to do that.
I was interested to hear when I spoke with your team about how the back end of Qantas works. You don't work in silos. It's not QantasLink, Qantas, Jetstar, but you kind of have vision, or you can oversee each organisation. Can you run us through what that's like from a back end perspective?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably coming back to your earlier question of why I'm at Qantas. It's probably one of the reasons, why I've stayed so long. We do have our separate, what we call AOCs, airline operating certificates and brands, and so there's absolutely an element where we are, sort of working specifically on our own areas. But the great thing is there is, support across, shared services, be that marketing or brand or customer. And so it's very much like working in a matrix, which is good. But, I think one of the things that we do well is just work across different silos to get things done. And that's really helpful because you get the best learnings and are able to leverage, skills across all parts of the group. So, yeah, it's good.
Do you work quite closely with the CEO of Qantas, Vanessa Hudson?
Yes, yeah. Vanessa's my boss, so yes. But, Vanessa, I think, is doing, a phenomenal job at, really positioning the group for the future. And it is an exciting future for the Qantas Group. We are undertaking our largest ever fleet renewal. We just, a couple of weeks ago, took delivery of our new A321 XLR. That aircraft you'll see in the domestic network, and it will replace the 737 over time. We have our A350 Sunrise aircraft that will come and fly the direct services services to London and New York, and that's next year. So that's incredibly bright. And I think that's one of these examples of, Qantas continuing to innovate and push to the future, and that really came from what we saw with our Perth-London services, where Australians, we know they love to travel, and there's this absolute demand to go direct, and we've seen that work really well, and so we're very focused on how we can continue to have a network that supports Australians doing the travel that they love. But there is a bright future ahead, and we've got lots of work to do, and we look forward to seeing those aircraft come in. And as I said, in the regional space, we're in the midst of our transition across the turboprop fleet, so you won't really be seeing those 36-seat or 50-seat aircraft anymore. You'll just be seeing our 74-seat Q400. We've got about 5 of those in. We have 14 on order, so more to come, and we look forward to that continuing to deliver reliable services for you all.
Another thing you're looking at is sustainability, of course, and biofuels. Can you run us through where QantasLink is in the process of that at the moment?
Yeah, so from a Qantas Group perspective, we have a bold climate ambition, and that's because, again, we feel very strongly about ensuring that our children and grandchildren have the ability to travel in the same way that we do. And so we have some clear targets that we've set for ourselves around net zero by 2050, and by 2030 we want to get up to about 10% use of sustainable aviation fuel. They are challenging targets, and we are very focused as a group on how do we work through achieving those. Sustainable aviation fuel for us is one of the key levers to decarbonise for aviation, and we think that there is a great opportunity and alignment for a domestic SAF industry here in Australia, and particularly how that could link into regional Australia. We have many feedstocks for SAF here in Australia, agriculture residue, wind, solar, things like that can support hydrogen and other feedstocks for SAF. And many of those skills and capabilities exist in regional Australia. So there is great alignment between what that could mean for jobs, for economic growth, and also just for fuel security for Australia as well. So we are, continuing to have that conversation. The challenge is it's very expensive, and so we have to work on how do we get, supply and bringing those costs down over time in a way that's not going to, be unviable for services. So it is a challenge, but one that we also see great opportunity and, as I said, some real alignment with regional Australia as well.
Sure, it sounds like something that agriculture could benefit from.
Yeah, and a good example of that, we've set aside $400 million in a climate fund that is really focused on how we look at SAF projects and carbon offsetting projects too. But one example in Townsville, actually, we have partnered with Airbus on a project called Jet Zero Australia, and that is using sugarcane residual waste to turn into ethanol, to turn into a SAF fuel. So great example of a project that is supporting, that particular community, and, we're really hopeful that that will produce some great benefits and off-takes as well. But those are the types of things that we're continuing to look at and talking to government about how we continue to support.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I might just open to the floor.
Thanks. Mick Veach, you didn't touch on slot management into the airports. And so for regional Australia, regional New South Wales, particularly on inclement weather days into the city, what's the impact of the slot management processes currently at Sydney Airport that allow regional people to land when they expect to land? And what's the internal competition with Qantas around that, and Jetstar around their slots, the availability of those slots?
Yeah, so look, on terrible weather days, wind, storms and things like that, air services and manage air traffic control, and so they will have what we call ground delay programs, and they implement those across all airlines, international, domestic, regional. So it's very much a matter of, we take the slot that we can get, and they work towards these movement caps that they have. They can't go over those. And so if there is a ground delay program where they stop services for an hour or two if there's storms, everything gets pushed back but still has to meet those caps. So it is a case of, when you're coming in on a particular service, you get the slot that you get. That is not something that the Qantas Group or its AOCs manage or control. It's something that air services do. So it's a challenge, and that's why some of those days you can see some long delays or cancellations because of that. We continue to we spend time with air services a lot on their the air traffic control and congestion and things like that. So there's an ongoing conversation that we have with that. We did have some challenges a while ago they had some challenges around their resourcing, which was impacting some of the en route management. They're largely working through that, though. That was sort of a post-COVID thing as the industry was getting back. But on slots into Sydney, New South Wales has ring-fence slots for regional Australia, so there really isn't a challenge with any airlines being able to get access to slots for New South Wales.
Rachel, thank you. Adam Kay from Cotton Australia. I was just wondering how, when Badgerys comes on board, and how regional flights will be. Will they be at Mascot? Will they be at Badgerys? What's the thinking on that at the moment?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. Well, firstly, I was actually out at Western Sydney a couple of weeks ago. It's a beautiful looking airport. It's very big. So clearly, it's been built with the intention of growth. Look, to begin with, we will not have regional services out at Western Sydney to begin with. It will be Jetstar and QantasLink, but there'll be QantasLink services more into capital cities. We don't think yet that it makes sense for regional services, but I think this is something that I'd say we will wait and see. If there is demand there and it makes sense, then we'll always be happy to look at that. But we're also cognisant that a lot of our customers who connect on or who are operating on our QantasLink services connect onto another domestic service or international service. So it wouldn't really make sense from that perspective, because those connections you need to do out there at Kingsford Smith. But if we saw, demand, we would look at it, but I think it's a wait and see. Thanks.
Stephen Wentworth, Feeding the Future Consulting Research. Thank you for your presentation and comments. Touching back, you touched on Qantas started in regional Australia, and you tried to explain why the price differential is, but it looks very transparent, very different. If you're lucky enough to book ahead to get a return flight from Sydney to Tamworth, it's about $500. If you do it per kilometre basis, that makes London 27,000 return in economy. Yet, you talked about competition coming and trying to keep competition in the market. When Bonza came in, you dropped your prices by 70%, and yet you basically drove them out of the market. You talk about a commitment to regional New Australia. How can you justify your prices when your actions say otherwise?
Thanks, Stephen. And firstly, I can see that emotion there, so apologies. I can understand that it feels really frustrating if you're looking at a price and and it's expensive. As said, as I come back, when we look at all of our costs, those main ones being airport charges, engineering and maintenance, fuel, those are costs that are increasing far beyond CPI. And those are challenges that not just Qantas has, Rex has had, Bonza's had, Jetstar's had. They are across the industry. As I said, the challenge that we have is in a market, if you take Tamworth, there are far fewer customers on Tamworth than they are between Sydney and Melbourne. And so those costs ultimately have to get spread across a smaller number of customers. That is, economies of scale. We obviously also, like hotels, we yield manage. So yes, there will be flights where the demand is high and you will see the price higher. There'll also be flights where the demand is really low and you won't see those prices, you'll see them differently. We do try to stimulate demand with sale activity. We will typically have, where we can, 10 to 12 sales a year, and I always encourage our customers to look out for our sales and to book early. That is one of the ways that you can get more value on your flight. But these are some of the challenges that we have to work through and manage.
Rachel, Andrew Marshall from the Land newspaper. Two things. You're talking about being forced to transition to bigger planes. That suggests that some of our smaller airports are going to be unviable because you're either going to be having to operate fewer flights per week to accommodate, to be able to cope with the 70 passengers or whatever. And also, does that mean you've got a problem, you'll be having more problems with your technical side of things, the engineering side of things, where you've got to upgrade a whole lot of... there seems to be a considerable shortage of aircraft engineering people on the ground in the bush or anywhere for that matter, and you're going to have problems trying to find those, or is that problem starting to fix itself?
Thanks, Andrew. So your first question on transitioning to our 74 seats, many of our markets will actually get more seats because the frequency won't necessarily change. Not all markets are like that, but some, there are a number of markets that will maintain frequency and have more seats. I should acknowledge that right now we are in the middle of a transition. So what that's meant, as we've retired the older 200 and 300 aircraft, we've had to do that because we have to retrain those pilots onto the Q400, and that is up to 3 months to do. So we're in this period where you have to reduce some frequency to ensure that we can retrain our pilots to then build it back up, and then as the new or the remaining Q400s come in, we'll be able to build back to those schedules. Some markets, though, may have lower frequency, but the actual seats and capacity will still be the same. And that is part of one of the things that we're trying to do to actually put downward pressure on price, because it will help us manage some of those structural cost challenges that are there. But ultimately as well, if there's growth and if there's demand, we are going to want to be able to look at more services, and we're always, network teams, commercial teams are always looking at where the demand is. And we try to manage that really well, particularly for seasonal-based demand, event-based demand, things like that. To your second question on skills, we, coming out of COVID, absolutely had some challenges in skills around pilots and engineers. We are mostly through that, but I would say that, to my point before on attracting, more females, that's not just females. I'd say that is also, attracting, all people into the industry. As industry grows, there's ebbs and flows, and typically, as we buy bigger airplanes and, there's, more jobs for pilots and engineers, it all comes from, the regional part of the industry, and that's why I talked before about the importance of an ecosystem and ensuring that there is enough skills feeding the entire industry of itself. So we're always going to be really focused on that. We're running engineering apprenticeship programs. We've got a number of apprentices in QantasLink and Qantas Engineering as well, so that we can balance the requirement for those skills into the future.
Thanks, Rachel. My name's Ash Cooper. I'll ask this question in a private capacity, but I just wanted to pick up on the Tamworth question before. Canberra is my local airport. When I book international flights, it is cheaper for me to book my QantasLink to Sydney flights separately than if I book Canberra to the overseas destination. And I've always wondered why that is, because again, I can't justify the price for the Canberra-Sydney leg or the Canberra-Melbourne leg for the direct booking, the two tickets versus individual bookings. And so I was wondering why is the question, particularly for the equity for regional air travellers?
Yeah, look, so what you're talking about is an origin and destination fare, Canberra, let's say LA, versus, so you're saying that is...
Yeah, I could book, say, QF 1217 with the direct, Canberra, LA or whatever it might be. But if I book QF 1217 separately to the Sydney, LA, it'll be sometimes $500-600 cheaper for a return airfare.
Yeah, look, I don't, again, it'll be a case of, at that time, what was the, supply and demand, and it's probably something that I'm really happy to kind of take offline and have a look at, without knowing, the day and what it looked like. It's hard to be able to say. But I think kind of comes to this point that, there will be, sale fares in market sometimes, and so that might be, we're just running a regional sale, so your Sydney-Canberra fare might be cheaper because there's a sale on, but the international network's not on sale, so it could be a whole range of different factors. Unfortunately, I don't know the specific example, but I've got Adam here, so really happy to take that offline.
Maybe time for one more question.
Me again, Rachel. I just wondered about subsidised routes, and just in New South Wales, are there many routes that the government has to step in on and help you?
Yeah, no, there are some licensed routes, which is Lord Howe and Moree. So they're not subsidised, just licensed. Now, Lord Howe is a market that actually we're transitioning off because we're retiring the 200. But Moree is a licensed route.
And being from cotton, Moree is the one that I'm interested in, that a lot of our cotton growers are interested in. So what does that mean, a licensed route?
It means that we're the only operator on it. So you have to have a licence to operate that, and QantasLink holds that licence.
So the current sort of reduction in service, is that because of the new planes coming, or and training up the pilots?
No, so we are meeting our licence requirements. So to get that licence, you have to have a commitment to a certain number of services, which we're meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more, Rachel?
Yeah.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. JL from New Farm. We have a commercial interest in sustainable aviation fuel, and I was heartened to hear your discussion on that. Given QantasLink's extensive regional network, how do you see regional airports and communities contributing to or benefiting from SAF production and use as well?
Yeah, I think it really comes in that development of feedstocks. So, multiple different examples of feedstock types. As said, we've got the sugarcane example, canola oils, many different types, or municipal waste, things like that, or, as I said, renewable hydrogen or electricity that can be these feedstocks for SAF. So I really think that's the opportunity for regional communities and cities that have those feedstocks that can really help, be the projects that actually kickstart the development, not just of the feedstock, but then the production into the actual fuel itself. we are already starting to export a number of our feedstocks, overseas, and you kind of go, how does that sort of make sense? Particularly because you then kind of go, there's also a fuel security angle to this as well. So as I said, we're continuing to look at projects in Australia, but they are high risk at this point in time because there's got to be some off takes at the end. Some of this technology is still being tested, but I think it's something that it needs many people in the industry to really lean into to help see how we can support it.